Do you know which country has the largest number of carrier-based aircraft in the world? Don't think that our J-35 fleet makes us the strongest. Although our three aircraft carriers and amphibious assault ships can carry carrier-based aircraft, we still lag behind the Americans. Just think about the Americans flying around with aircraft carriers, and no country is immune to their fear. The number of aircraft carriers and carrier-based aircraft also represents maritime hegemony. So do you know which countries currently have the largest number and most powerful carrier-based aircraft? This issue of global inventory will take you to understand the 5 countries with the largest number of carrier-based aircraft. Let's see if our 3 aircraft carrier formations can take them to the 5th place. France is a veteran European power, but unexpectedly, France has only 1 aircraft carrier. Although a new one was ordered this year, it is said that it will not be put into service until 2038. By then, our 5th aircraft carrier may have been commissioned. But then again, France's Charles de Gaulle is also okay. Although it has a displacement of more than 40,000 tons and a length of less than 265 meters, it is about the same level as our 0075 amphibious assault ship. However, this aircraft carrier is the only nuclear-powered aircraft carrier in Europe, and it is also a catapult type. Its endurance is also better than other European aircraft carriers. They are too powerful. Although there is only 1 aircraft carrier, this aircraft carrier can carry a maximum of 40 carrier-based aircraft. Don't look at it as only 40 aircraft. This is already among the top 5 in the world. The most important thing is that their carrier-based aircraft are still self-made. The Rafale M carrier-based aircraft can be said to be their trump card. Of course, under normal circumstances, the Charles de Gaulle carries about 30 carrier-based aircraft. However, these aircraft are not only Rafale M carrier-based aircraft, but also ERC Hawkeye early warning aircraft and NH-90 helicopters, which are essential models for aircraft carriers. Only in this way can a complete aircraft carrier air battle group be formed. Otherwise, when there are only fighters and other models are needed, it will be a loss. In addition, the Charles de Gaulle has rich actual combat experience, such as in Libya against Gaddafi and Iraq against ISIS. The Charles de Gaulle has participated in all the operations supporting the U.S. military in Afghanistan. It is a real veteran. The only disadvantage is that it has few aircraft carriers and few carrier-based aircraft. However, it is still the 4th largest power in Europe. Britain, once the empire on which the sun never sets, is not doing well now. Britain currently has 2 aircraft carriers, both of which are much larger and have a displacement of over 70,000 tons and a deck area of 16,000 square meters. In theory, it can accommodate 40 carrier-based aircraft. However, in actual operation, due to the high cost and maintenance of the F-35B, the British currently only regularly deploy about 12 to 18 aircraft, which is a limit. The combat configuration is only a little over 30 aircraft, and the F-35B is not built by the British, but given by the United States. Let's say that if the British Army wants to fight, it has to see what Lockheed Martin is like first. But then again, the F-35B can be said to be the only practical stealth carrier-based aircraft in the world. Its biggest advantage is that it can take off from a simple platform, that is, it does not need a catapult or a paddle jump. As long as the deck is flat and the wind is strong enough, it can jump up, which is exactly what the British aircraft carrier concept is. It does not seek to be the largest, but to be maneuverable, flexible, high stealth, fast to attack, and fast to retreat. It is understood that the UK currently has about 30 to 40 F-35Bs. It is expected to be gradually expanded to more than 60 aircraft. In addition to the F-35B, the UK has almost no high-end carrier-based combat capabilities, such as early warning aircraft, electronic warfare aircraft, and drones. It is a bit like wearing an exquisite suit, but with a big pair of pants underneath. The number of carrier-based aircraft shared by 2 aircraft carriers is actually not high. At most, it is only 50 or 60 aircraft, which is not as many as India's scrap metal. What's more funny is that the UK also likes to share, such as jointly deploying with the United States and Japan, and even letting Dutch fighter jets on aircraft carriers. The smell of multinational carpooling is overwhelming. Although it has the flavor of EU solidarity, it is a disaster to command and dispatch when a war really breaks out. In general, the British aircraft carrier is large, but the aircraft it carries are small, and they are not built by themselves. But fortunately, the F-35B is of high quality, not bad, and it can also show up in the Asia-Pacific region. India is ranked third. No one would have thought that India's number of carrier-based aircraft would rank third in the world. But India does have two aircraft carriers that can take off and land fixed-wing fighter jets. Although their aircraft carriers cannot go far, they are still aircraft carriers. In addition to the Vikrant, which is made in various countries, there is also the Vikramaditya, purchased from Russia. However, the failure rate of this refurbished aircraft carrier is very high. The famous aircraft carrier sub-tank explosion was caused by this aircraft carrier. Each of these two aircraft carriers can carry more than 30 carrier-based aircraft, plus training aircraft and shore-based aircraft deployment aircraft. Currently, India has a total of more than 80 carrier-based aircraft and even close to 90. The main ones are Russian MiG-29Ks. The total number seems large, but don't be too happy. This aircraft has minor problems, such as paint peeling and oil leakage on takeoff. Indian pilots are accustomed to it, not to mention the 80% deployment rate in wartime. Even if only half of them could take off, even if it is the Buddha's blessing. India's domestically produced Tejas fighter jets were originally planned to be converted into carrier-based versions, but after flying 2 circles, they could not even land steadily on the deck and could only be used as ground training aircraft. Moreover, the failure rate of India's aircraft carrier platform is also difficult to describe. The Vikramaditya even stalled due to a problem with the boiler system and drifted on the sea, unable to move. In this state, if a war really breaks out, it may have to be towed out from the dock first. But then again, India's third place is not based on quality, but on quantity, platform, and dream. India's dream is to become the overlord of the Indian Ocean. It has really spent a lot of money to buy fighter jets and build aircraft carriers, but it is still far from being truly powerful in terms of a combat system. Although India's carrier-based aircraft have no actual combat experience, the frequent joint talks between the Navy and the United States, France, Japan, and other countries also show India's attitude. Their carrier-based aircraft force is not yet mature, but potential stocks. Once the successful introduction of stealth fighters or the development of reliable domestic platforms, the presence in the Indian Ocean region can be greatly enhanced. Second place, China. If we say which country has the fastest development of carrier-based aircraft in the world in recent years, it is undoubtedly China. From the service of the Liaoning in 2012 to the present, the 3 aircraft carriers of Liaoning, Shandong, and Fujian have gathered together. The carrier-based aircraft has grown from nothing to hundreds of aircraft. The development speed is really amazing. Since the launch of the Fujian, our country has become the world's second-largest aircraft carrier fleet country. The Fujian is a genuine electromagnetic catapult aircraft carrier with a length of 320 meters and a displacement of over 80,000 tons. It has touched the back of the American Ford class and is a step up from the predecessors of Liaoning, Shandong, and China. The main carrier-based aircraft is our own made, 15. According to public information, each aircraft carrier can carry about 24 F-15 fighters. There will be 35 later. Stealth carrier-based aircraft are gradually entering service, and coupled with KJ-600 early warning aircraft, anti-submarine helicopters, and ship-based drone combat systems are gradually being improved. Our 3 aircraft carriers can theoretically carry nearly 200 carrier-based aircraft together. Although the actual carrying capacity is not as much as that of American aircraft carriers because they are heavy carrier-based aircraft, the mass, payload, and combat radius of each aircraft are both world-class. In addition, the electromagnetic catapult and intelligent scheduling system have a takeoff frequency and combat density that is not necessarily worse than that of the United States. However, my country's carrier-based aircraft have not yet participated in actual combat, which is different from the United States style of frequent expeditions. However, our exercises in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait have been one after another, and basically, after practicing the simulated combat, once the Fujian warship is combat-ready, it will only take a matter of time for the 3-ship formation to be deployed globally. It can be said that although China currently ranks second, it is not impossible for it to be ranked first in terms of future potential. The United States is number one. To be honest, when it comes to aircraft carriers and carrier-based aircraft, it is impossible to bypass the United States. You can question its system and its diplomacy, but you really cannot question the United States' dominance in the field of aircraft carriers and carrier-based aircraft. As of 2025, the United States will have 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, not counting the amphibious assault ships that can carry the F-35B. Each of these 11 ships can carry 60 to 75 fixed-wing carrier-based aircraft, which is enough. Isn't it scary that there are more than 600 or 700 of them? The U.S. military's main carrier-based aircraft is based on the Super Hornet, equipped with the EA-18G Growler for electronic warfare, the E-2D Hawkeye for airborne early warning, the MH-60 series for anti-submarine warfare, and the new F-35C for stealth. In the future, the MQ-25 unmanned tanker will also be deployed. The entire combat system really has no shortcomings. However, having said that, although the number of U.S. aircraft carriers is large, they are not without problems. For example, the old Nimitz-class aircraft carriers have been in service for 30 years and have a high failure rate and high maintenance costs. Although the newly built Ford-class aircraft carriers are said to be full of black technology, such as electromagnetic catapults and advanced shipboard networks, they are all available. The actual deployment is still plagued by problems. The technology is immature, and the system is unstable. It has not yet fully entered the combat sequence. However, an important point cannot be ignored. That is, there are many aircraft carriers, but they are also expensive. Each one costs more than $1 billion and requires thousands of people to operate. The cost of each operation is over $100 million. Therefore, in recent years, the United States has also been gradually exploring small drone aircraft carriers and carrier-based wind group tactics, intending to reduce costs while maintaining advantages in the future. In general, the U.S. carrier-based aircraft is the world's top configuration. Although it is a bit outdated, it is still the only country in the world that can achieve air and sea strike delivery anywhere in the world. But in the future, the speed at which our aircraft carriers are produced will be compared with the speed at which old American aircraft carriers are retired and newly built. The American Navy may not be stronger than ours. By the time Brussels locked in its $95 billion tariff package, the message was unmistakable. Europe wasn't bluffing. Washington's miscalculation had lit a firestorm, and the ripple effects were spreading far beyond the Atlantic. Markets saw it instantly. Airbus stock rose another 3.7%. Canadian steel exports to Europe jumped 24% in just the first quarter, and 7 new trade agreements between Ottawa and Brussels moved at lightning speed. What stood out most wasn't just the speed, it was America's absence. For decades, the U.S. had been at the center of every deal. Now it wasn't even in the room. This wasn't a fracture, it was a reconfiguration. And this time, the United States wasn't shaping the map, it was being written out of it. Some former EU leaders didn't call it a crisis, they called it a turning point. Boeing's $43 billion deal collapsing, COMAC's sudden credibility, Canada's trade surge, and Europe's quiet new corridors of power all pointed to the same conclusion. The balance of global trade was shifting, one contract at a time. Washington once believed tariffs were leverage. In reality, tariffs had become a catalyst, accelerating the birth of a new world where the U.S. was no longer the anchor, but the outlier. While Washington stayed mired in disputes, Brussels got to work. The EU began drafting new standards for trade, digital rules, logistics, and dispute resolution. The process wasn't chaotic, it was precise. Each agreement signed, each shipment rerouted, each contract rewritten was part of a larger plan. Europe wasn't threatening to break away, it was already doing it. Supply chains began shifting in real time. Trade no longer flowed through Washington by default. Instead, it started weaving new paths through Canada, India, the Gulf states, and even Africa. The center of gravity in trade and arbitration was quietly drifting north and east, away from America. For decades, America's power lay in its ability to enforce stability. That stability had become its greatest export. But now, tariffs had turned stability into vulnerability. Partners no longer saw Washington as reliable. They saw it as a risk. And in trade, risk is poison. Europe moved quickly to replace the old framework. The EU pushed ahead with 17 bilateral trade negotiations since 2023, reaching deep into Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The model was simple: duty-free access in exchange for cooperation on digital standards, labor protections, and infrastructure investment. In 2024, Brussels signed a $3.4 billion supply chain deal with India. The twist? It bypassed the US dollar entirely. For Washington, this was a nightmare scenario. Allies no longer relying on the dollar system it once dominated. For Europe, it was a bold declaration of independence. These weren't isolated deals. They were systematic moves, carefully stacked like building blocks, designed to replace the American-led rules that had governed global trade for decades. Each deal made the U.S. less central. Each agreement reinforced Europe's new leverage. The broader effect was clear: strategic isolation for America. And the damage wasn't confined to Boeing. The ripple effects cut across U.S. industries: agriculture, automotive, and technology. Markets that once assumed zero tariff access to Europe suddenly closed. For decades, that access was a strategic advantage for American companies. Now it was gone. Even with promises of protection, U.S. firms couldn't escape the new reality: shrinking demand, higher costs, and rising uncertainty. What Washington had branded economic security was now a liability. Tariffs meant to protect had instead exposed the system's weakest points. The US-EU axis, once the backbone of the global economy, no longer held the same weight. A new geometry was forming: a trade triangle linking Europe with Asia and the Middle East. Energy, data, logistics, supply chains, all were being rerouted. Washington thought tariffs would force Europe back to the negotiating table. Instead, they hardened Europe's resolve. Each time America threw up another barrier, Europe signed another agreement, this time without Washington. The new industrial priorities were obvious: clean hydrogen, battery technology, digital infrastructure, semiconductors. Europe coordinated strategically, using multilateral agreements to strengthen ties across continents. Long-standing dependence on American aerospace, agriculture, and arbitration mechanisms was being systematically dismantled. Each new deal reduced risks tied to Washington's instability, and in Brussels the strategy was clear: this wasn't retaliation, this was replacement. The 50% tariffs Washington imposed, meant to scare allies into compliance, had become the exact opposite: a trigger for Europe to redraw the entire map. Ryanair's potential shift away from Boeing. Europe sourcing food from Latin America instead of the U.S. clean tech investments flowing into Canadian companies. Semiconductor cooperation moving toward India. This wasn't noise, it was structure. A comprehensive reordering of priorities, partners, and principles. The irony was brutal. In trying to strengthen its position, Washington had ignited a chain reaction that could permanently weaken it. The world wasn't watching a loud, fiery collapse. It was watching a calculated fracture. Quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. No speeches, no treaties, just contracts rewritten, routes redirected, and policies redefined. The conclusion was unavoidable. The transatlantic bond no longer held the same pull. In its place was a multipolar, dispersed network, a system where Europe signed deals without American oversight, where Canada rose as a trade bridge, and where China no longer had to knock on the door because it was already inside the room. For decades, Washington assumed it would always write the rules. But now, allies were writing their own. Tariffs, once touted as America's trump card, had become the ticket for others to seek opportunities elsewhere. The United States hadn't just miscalculated, it had overplayed its hand. And in global trade, once trust is lost, it doesn't come back quickly, if it comes back at all. The looming collapse of Boeing's $43 billion deal with Ryanair wasn't just about jets. It was a symbol. For decades, Boeing represented American reliability, a brand that seemed untouchable. Now that very symbol was being questioned, not because of design flaws or lack of technology, but because of policy choices out of Washington. If a giant like Boeing could be sidelined so quickly, What would stop other American industries from suffering the same fate? Losing a contract was painful enough, but losing trust, that was devastating. Trust, once gone, is infinitely harder to recover. Europe wasn't seeking to punish the United States. It was seeking to replace it. When Washington's tariffs sparked chaos, Brussels immediately turned outward. Agricultural imports from Latin America, steel from Canada, electronics from China, semiconductors from India. These weren't stopgaps. They were part of a systematic design for stability. Each new agreement reduced exposure to Washington's volatility. Each alternative supplier secured was another nail in the coffin of dependency. The Canada-EU Technology Trade Pact became the model. Zero tariffs, strong labor standards, joint commitments on climate and digital policy. It worked. Brussels exported that blueprint worldwide, from Nairobi to New Delhi. Nations lined up, eager to trade under rules that were predictable, stable, and enforceable. Then came COMAC. Its rise wasn't about propaganda, it was about timing. With Boeing in crisis and Airbus stretched to capacity, COMAC suddenly became the third option. If Ryanair signed for Chinese aircraft, the shock waves would go beyond economics. It would shatter the Western aviation monopoly, eroding the FAA's global benchmark status and forcing the world to recognize China's certification regime as a legitimate competitor. A scenario once dismissed as impossible was fast becoming reality, all sparked by tariffs that Washington believed would strengthen its grip. The deeper irony? Washington assumed economic pressure would bring allies back to the table. Instead, it pushed them to walk away entirely. In a world full of choices, leverage without stability was no leverage at all. In the 21st century, power isn't just about tanks or GDP. It's about who writes the rules for climate, digital standards, clean energy, and trade. Europe is stepping confidently into that role. Canada is moving in lockstep. China is no longer waiting at the door. It's already inside. The United States hasn't collapsed. But the era of unquestioned American leadership in global trade has ended. Not with a dramatic crash, but with countless small shifts, contracts, and corridors quietly redrawn. Today, the global economy no longer waits for a green light from Washington. Tariffs, once seen as America's sharpest weapon, have become the very reason partners seek out other paths. The $2 trillion in lost trade hasn't vanished. It's been redirected. The $43 billion Boeing contract isn't just suspended, it's become a warning. And the alliances once anchored by U.S. foreign influence aren't destroyed. They're simply being rewritten without it. The question now isn't whether this is a trade war. The question is whether the U.S. has excluded itself from the future of global trade. And the answer is becoming clearer every day. Becoming clearer every day. Becoming clearer